Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, wherever you are joining us. This is Jennifer Lee, and you are joining the 48th Automation Hour. And if you're joining us for the first time, all lines are muted. We're actually not going to use the chat function within GoToWebinar. We suggest that you go into the chat and see that we posted a link to our success community, Trailblazer community, Salesforce Automation Hour. So post your questions there. We will be monitoring that throughout the call. And if we don't get to your questions, we'll get to it after the fact. And then we will be posting the recording as well as the link to the deck sometime after today's session. So again, Trailblazer Community, Salesforce Automation Hour. Our website is automationhour.com, where you could access our previous recordings as well as register for future ones. And speaking of future sessions, here they are. So we have several of our members from the community as well as several MVPs. So great upcoming sessions. So register for those, and if you can't attend them, you'll at least get the link to the recording after the fact. And we can't do this without Concrete.io. Thank you for sponsoring us so that we could bring this free webinar series to the Salesforce community. And here are your co-hosts, David Litton, myself, and Rakesh Gupta. This was from last year's Dreamforce, and we will be presenting at this year's Dreamforce. So definitely come and say hi to us. I listed out Rakesh's solo sessions, Rakesh and David's dual session, as well as my session. So find us, just say hi. We love meeting the people who attend Automation Hour. And with that, we're very excited to have Shruti on. She is our first presenter all the way from India, and we really appreciate the fact that she is up late her time to come and present Automation Hour to us. So with that, I am going to hand it over to her. And now you should have control. Yep, I see your screen. And just so you know, you do hear background noise, and it is raining in India right now. So go ahead.
Okay. Thank you, Jennifer. I am Shruti Sridharan. So I work as a Salesforce developer, and I hail from Kerala, India. So I have spoken at multiple conferences and webinars. I also lead the student and WIT user groups in Kerala. You can find me on Twitter at Shruti4Chess and reach out to me on my website, that is shrutisridharan.com. So the topic for this hour is switching to classic. Tell me why. So what's in for me? We will look at the ever-challenging problem of adoption, how we can solve this problem. I'll introduce you all to a solution using flows. We will build this flow from scratch together and finally look at some key points to remember and then wrap it up. Challenging problem of adoption. So I'm very sure every admin here on this webinar might have heard these questions from their users when they were first switched to Lightning. We all know that Lightning is awesome, but at the same time, it does lack a lot of features that Classic had. I mean features we all loved. We all have to face the change. We cannot escape from it. We have to understand that Lightning is indeed the future. But the main problem is convincing the users to start using it. Users are so reluctant to use the new features, they are confused. I have found that lack of training is usually what causes this. Also, the main problem is that the users are so used to the existing UI or the classic UI, and they have all found their comfort zones. They just don't want to adopt or start using the new features or UI. For some of them, they find it very overwhelming too. So how can we solve this trivial problem? Now, let's see how we can solve this problem. We need to ask them why. We need to ask them why they are not happy. It's not feasible to get to each user and understand their concerns. Instead, we need a way by which we can get feedback from the user in a more systematic and organized way. Of course, not Excel sheets, but something more friendly. We need to understand their concerns, educate, and train them. So, how do we get feedback from the users? I mean, a way by which they could submit a form to specify their thoughts and concerns. Think of it like sending a get feedback to your users or similar, but something that is out of the box and resides within Salesforce. And yes, I need a solution that is admin friendly indeed. So let's welcome flows. Yes, I mean the visual workflows. So let's see how we can achieve this. At first, we will create a permission set that when assigned to a user would prohibit him or her from switching to classic. Ouch, I know. Hang on, the fun is yet to start. Next, we will create a flow with all the fields required to capture the feedback from the user. The flow will save the replies back on the user record. Now, we will make this flow readily available to all the users via the Lightning Experience utility bar. We will also create a process that will be fired as soon as the user record has been updated with the replies. Now, this process will be responsible to delete the assigned permission set. Voila, that's it. Easy, right? That's a lot of talking. So now let's go ahead and build it. So this is my Salesforce org where I'll be building this. So first I'll be creating a flow. So here in the flow section, I click on new flow. So my flow would contain 3 elements, and this flow will be a screen flow. So my first element will be a screen, and it would be, let me name it as tell us why. Now I'm adding a long text area field in this. So this field is to get the feedback from the users. So I'm naming this as why switch to classic. Also, I'm making it a required field. Then now the next element, that will be a record update. So I'm dragging a record update and naming it as update preferences, and this would update my user object. Also, I'm giving a criteria over here, that is id equals to, and for this I'm creating a new formula and naming it as current user ID, which will be of text type, and here I'm specifying $user.id, which would fetch me the current user's ID. And finally I'm clicking on OK. Then here I'm specifying the fields that I want to update on the user object. So I'm selecting the user preferences lightning experience preferred field, which is a boolean field, and I'm setting it as false. So this field specifies, so after switching to classic, the next time you log in into the org, you want to log in into the classic mode or the lightning mode as default. So if you specify this as false, then you'll be logged into the classic mode itself. Then I'm specifying the next field that has to be updated, that is why switch to classic, which is a custom field that I created on my user object to collect the feedback from the users. And here now I'm specifying my screen input field why switch to classic, which is the long text area field that I had created before. And finally I'm clicking on OK. So that's with the record update. Then the third and the last element, that is a screen. So I am dragging a screen and I am naming it as success. Also, I am adding a display text here, which I am naming it as thank you. And the message that I'll be specifying here is thank you for submitting the reason. Please click here to go back to classic. See you soon. So another thing that I'm doing here is I'm making the click here text as a hyperlink, and the path that I'm specifying is /home /home .jsp. So clicking on click here text would take you back to the classic home page. And once that is done, I'm hitting the OK button. And now let me just connect all the elements, and I'm specifying my start element also. Once that is done, let me just save my flow and name it as Y switch to classic. Also note that this will be a screen flow. Now let me close this. And my next step will be to activate this flow which I had just created. After that, I go back to the list of flows, and my next step will be to create another flow. So this flow is to delete the permission set assignment after he or she submits the feedback. So this will be an auto-launched flow which will be having basically 4 elements. And my first element will be a record lookup. And I'm naming it as get permission set, and it will look up to the permission set object. Also, I'm specifying the criteria over here, that is name equal to disable underscore Salesforce underscore classic. Don't worry about this section, I'll be explaining later in my presentation. Then I'm assigning the ID to a new variable called permission set ID, which will be private variable of type text. Also, I am checking this checkbox to assign null values to the variable if there are no records found. And finally, I am hitting OK. Now, the next element will be again a record lookup, and I'm naming it as get permission set assignment, and this would look up to the permission set assignment object. Also here I'm specifying 2 criteria. So the first one is the assignee ID equals to let me create a new variable called user ID. So this will be a flow variable whose value will be set from the process which will be creating later. So here I'm specifying the type as text, since this is to hold the current user's ID, and the type will be input only, and I'm hitting on OK. Also, I have one more criteria over here, that is the permission set ID should be equal to the permission set ID that I just created before. And also I'm collecting the permission set assignment ID in a new variable called permission set assignment ID, which will be again of type text and a private variable. Also here I'm checking the checkbox to assign null values if there are no records found. So now my third element will be to create a decision to check if there's a permission set assignment. Check permission set assignment. And it will have one outcome, that is yes. And here let me just select the permission set assignment ID variable that I just created before to hold the permission set assignment ID, and I'm checking if it is not null. So I am selecting is null from here, and I am checking if that is false. So after that, the next element is a record delete, and I'm naming this as delete permission set assignment, and this would delete the permission set assignment objects record. So here I'm specifying the ID of the record that needs to be deleted, and here I'm specifying my permission set assignment ID. And finally I'm hitting on OK. Then once I've created all these 4 elements, let me just connect them. So the decision would connect to the record delete for the outcome yes, and now let me connect the other elements and specify the start element as the record lookup. Once that is done, my next step will be to save the flow as an auto-launched flow, and I'm naming it as enable Salesforce Classic. Please note that this will be an auto-launched flow. So after saving it, I'm closing the flow designer and I'm activating it here. So after I have finished creating my 2 flows and then activating them, my next step will be to create a process. So let me go to the process builder, and let me create a new process. and I would name it as allow access to classic. Also, this process has to be started when a record changes. And I'm hitting the save button. And now I'm adding an object over here, that is, this process should be invoked when a user record is changed. So I'm selecting the object as user and start the process when a record is created or edited, and hit on save. Then the next is, let me specify the criteria. So I'm naming it as switch to classic requested, and this criteria should be executed whenever the conditions are met. So let me now specify the condition. So here I'm selecting my custom field on the user object, and I'm checking if it is changed. So I'm setting the value as true and I'm hitting on save. Then the next is, let me specify my immediate action. So my immediate action will be to launch flows. So the action type is selected as flows, and the action name will be, let me give, allowing user access to classic. Also, let me just select the auto launched flow that I just created, that is enable Salesforce Classic. And now let me set my flow variables. So this is the flow variable that I created of type input in my flow user ID. So I'm selecting that, and here it will be field reference referencing to the ID of the user record or the current user. So I'm selecting the user ID and hitting on choose. Then I am hitting the save button. So my process is done. So now let me just activate it. So now I have activated my process. So let me go to the setup. And here I'm going to the app manager section, and so the default app will be sales. So I'm selecting the sales lightning and hitting on edit. And here, so this opens up the lightning app builder page, and here I am clicking on the utility bar, and then I'm clicking on the add button over here, and selecting flow option from here. And as the label, I am giving it as switch to classic. Now, as the flow, this is the screen flow that I had created. That is why switch to classic. And then once that is selected, I am hitting on the save button. So once that is done, now let me go back to my setup page. And now the next step for me will be to create a permission set. So I'm going to the permission set option over here, and I'm going ahead and creating a new permission set called disable Salesforce Classic. So if you remember, this was the name I had given in my second auto-launched flow that I'd created. And I'm hitting on the save button. Then I'm going to the system permissions section, and I'm editing it, and I'm searching for the hide. So here I have an option, hide option, to switch to Salesforce Classic, and I'm checking this checkbox. So what it does is, if this is checked, then the user will no longer see the option to switch to Classic, the default option. So after that, I'm hitting this save button. So once that is done, let me go here and click on the manage assignments, and I'm clicking on add assignments, and also I have a standard user, so I'm selecting the John Doe, which is a standard user, because I am a system admin, so by default I will be having all the permissions. So I am selecting John Doe user and clicking on assign. So once that is done, uh, now let me just log in as uh, John Doe. So I'm clicking on the login button. So here is where usually we find the switch to classic option. So now you can see that I no longer have that option over here, because I have assigned the permission set that I just created to John Doe user. Now here in the utility bar, you can see my flow that is switched to classic, and here is a long text area. So let me specify a reason why switch to classic. uh, I don't have recycle bin, and I'm hitting the next button. So here I get the link. uh, Now I'm clicking on this link. So you can see that I have come to the classic mode, the classic mode homepage, and now I have the option to switch back to lightning experience if I want. So I'm switching back to lightning experience, and here now if you see, the option to switch to Salesforce Classic, that is the default option, has already come back. So this is because in our second flow we had done delete the permissions at this time. So that's it with the demo. Now let's get back to our slides. So I hope the demo was helpful. So let's talk about some points to remember. So avoid free text boxes if possible. Instead, provide questions with predefined answers. You know, our users could trick us and give some junk feedback just to escape the wizard. Then, if you have free text boxes to record replies, ensure you educate users to give valuable feedback. And yes, few questions only. Let's make it to the point. So that's the end. So now let's look at the questions now.
Great. Thanks for that presentation. So for those of you who may have joined late, we are looking for questions out on our Trailblazer Community Salesforce Automation Hour. So please submit any questions you have on her presentation or any general process automation questions. We'll take those as well. So I'm taking a look out on the Trailblazer community, and M. Beth says, excellent presentation. How do you track history of the comments if the user has more than one issue over time?
Okay. Thank you, Mbest. Well, I kept it simple by just creating a simple long text area field on the user. However, you could enhance upon this idea by creating a new object altogether. You could recreate the user lookup on that text area fields and whatnot. Then create one record per user per submission. I hope that makes sense.
Okay. We're going to give a couple of minutes for folks to submit any questions that they have out on our Trailblazer Community Salesforce Automation Hour. I believe Rakesh also included that in our chat window for everyone for easy access. So while we wait for, there's another one. Steve says, thank you. Perhaps I missed something. If a user clicks the link to get to Classic without completing the flow, how did the flow finish and record that information?
I'm sorry, I didn't get the question.
Okay, so the question is, if the user clicks the link to get to Classic without completing the flow, how does the flow finish and record the information?
Okay, so that will not happen because they have to fill the required fields before they reach the last screen of the flow. I hope that clears it out.
Okay, Steve, if it doesn't, if you could post additional questions. And let's see if there's anybody else who's submitting. So while we wait for any additional questions, what resources would you recommend or have been helpful to you when you started learning Flow?
Well, you just need to know to use flows and process builder to build this. So I have been a big fan of flows. So I have always researched and tried to uh, learn on my own. Since I had experience writing in code, flows were actually easy for me. It was like easier to grasp.
Okay, Steve came back and said, my understanding with flows is that they don't save any information until the user clicks finish. So maybe if you could just step through the demo again, maybe we just missed a step.
Hello?
Did you hear the question?
Yes. If you click here, it will take you back to the Salesforce Classic.
Could you walk through the flow of how you set that up and where the link is and where the record create, or in this case, update is?
Okay. You mean in the user object?
Yeah, where is it updating the record in the flow?
Okay. Well, let me just show you. So let me just log in back as the system admin. So here I'm going to the user section. And here I have the John Doe. So I will have to add this to layout since I hadn't added. So here I go to the object manager and select the user. And here I have the layouts. So let me just edit it. And let me just add it. And hit the save button. Now let me go back to my users. And select John Doe. And here's the custom object, sorry, the custom field that I had created, and here is the value that I had entered. I hope that clears your doubt. So actually you can create a different object. So I just kept it simple by creating a field on the existing object. But you can always capture responses on different objects as different records.
Okay. We'll
I
see.
hope
Hopefully that
that
answered the
helps.
question.
Okay.
All right, let's see if anybody else has any more questions. Just give another couple of seconds. Again, it could be related to this presentation or a general process automation question. All right. I am not seeing any more questions posted. So with that, I know it's really late for you, so I don't think we're going to keep you any further. So thanks so much for being our first presenter from India. And with that, I think we're going to end it. Thanks so much, everybody.
Thanks
Thank
a lot
you.
for the opportunity. I'm really grateful.
Thank you.
I'm looking forward for more.
All right. Thanks. Have a great weekend, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.